Hello and happy Tuesday, honeys. We have your whole lineup here of significant news stories from the arts world from the last week, and not really any administrative updates or anything like that, so let's go ahead and begin with the buzz. A lack of administrative updates or follow-ups does not mean we are lacking in story updates or follow-ups, so we'll start there. We heard that Frida Kahlo's Mexico City family home has opened as the new Museo Casa Kahlo. The artist's lifelong family home, known as Casa Roja, was originally purchased by the artist's parents and has been passed down through the generations. The new museum format itself is operated by the Fundación Kahlo. The space reportedly features personal artifacts telling the, quote, untold story of Frida's day-to-day life, end quote, outside her relationship with fellow artist Diego Rivera, focusing rather on her humanity and family legacy. Last week also saw a Bob Ross painting break a record at John Oliver's public media benefit auction. Ross's Cabin at Sunset, painted for a 1986 episode of PBS's iconic The Joy of Painting, sold for roughly $1,044,000 US on Monday. Oliver's benefit auction for public broadcasting will provide, quote, crucial funds towards free speech in America, end quote, according to Art News. We also learned of 4 additional suspects arrested in connection to the Louvre Museum heist. According to statements made by French prosecutors on Tuesday of last week, 2 men and 2 women between the ages of 31 and 40 and from the local area were arrested that day and are being questioned. According to Le Parisien, one of the men, who already has a criminal record, has been charged with organized theft and criminal conspiracy. He's also suspected to have been one of the 4 who actually carried out the heist. Although the Louvre recently rolled out a set of emergency security measures, a French national audit says the full extent of the recommended security changes are, quote, not expected to be finished until 2032, end quote. And finally, Sotheby's sold 125 works from Japan's Okada Museum. Sotheby's told Art News that the collection, whose worth was, quote, estimated in excess of $50 million US, end quote, hit the auction block in Hong Kong on Saturday, achieving white glove status, meaning every work was sold. It netted the equivalent of $88 million US plus fees and set 2 auction records for Japanese artists Kirigawa Utamaro and Hokusai. His Great Wave sold for a record $2.8 million US, nearly tripling its high estimate and going to a Japanese private collector. As previously covered, the museum's founder sold the artworks to settle a $50 million US legal bill that stems from his long-running feud with casino magnate Steve Wynn. Speaking of sales, a 1939 copy of Superman #1 became the most expensive comic book ever sold last week. 3 brothers made the incredible and rare find while clearing out their late mother's California loft last year. This original June 1939 copy of Superman was one of the earliest comics featuring the Man of Steel. The BBC reports that the copy was well preserved by the cool Northern California climate, so remained in, quote, remarkably pristine condition, end quote, earning a grade of 9 out of 10 by CGC, a large third-party comics grading service, surpassing the previous record of 8.5. Host of the sale, Heritage Auctions, called the discovery the, quote, pinnacle of comic collecting, end quote, while its vice president, Lon Allen, explained the brothers had only heard their mother's claims that she owned valuable comics, but never saw them, so didn't know she had this among her collection, which was started between the Great Depression and the start of World War II by her and her brother. They also didn't know she kept collecting after that point. This edition went on to sell for $9.12 US million, setting another new world record for the most expensive comic book ever auctioned. We also learned that a Renoir painting missing for a century sold in Paris for $2 million US. Titled The Child and His Toys, Gabrielle and the Son's Artist Jean, it depicts exactly that, the two playing with quote-unquote palpable warmth. The artwork, which was created roughly around 1910, had never been published or exhibited. Still, it didn't require any restoration work when it came to auction, where an international collector secured it on November 25th for 1.8 million euros, or about $2 million US, including buyer's fees, at a sale in Paris, says Art News. And to round out the sales category, a drawing said to be by Michelangelo will go to auction soon. The 5-inch tall red chalk drawing of a foot came to light when Giada Damon, a specialist in Old Master drawings at Christie's, noticed it among a batch of online inquiries from members of the public and studied its provenance to the point of being sure that it was genuine. Christie's subsequently declared it a study for Michelangelo's celebrated fresco ceiling of the Vatican's Sistine Chapel in Rome. It will be offered by the auction house in New York in February with an estimate between 1.5 and 2 million. Talk about valuable feet pics. In other news, Chanel opened China's first public contemporary art library last week. The project culminates the house's long-term partnership with the institution and anticipates further programming dedicated to contemporary Chinese craft, culture, and theater, say our sources. It is located on Shanghai's Power Station of Art's third floor, featuring exhibition grounds, a terrace theater, design center, and, of course, an 18,000 square foot library, which holds more than 50,000 books and audiobooks, over 10,000 of which are already accessible to the public. Gong Yan, the director of the Power Station of Art, told Art News that, quote, Espace Gabrielle Chanel stands as a tribute to cultural pioneers and a stage upon which the narrative of new life, new culture, and new art continues to unfold, end quote. We also learned that artists and former staffers alike have accused a London gallery of withholding payment. Pictorum Art Group and the brothers Jackson Navin and Matthew Navin behind it have been accused by LA-based artist Brittany Fanning, as well as others, of failure to pay, quote, despite numerous attempts to contact the principals, end quote. One such example is Finn Johnson, who received a court judgment ordering an £8,500 or about $11,000 payment for balances owed to her. Fanning herself says that she's owed around $6,500 for just 2 artworks and another $2,600 for a third. The allegations of difficulties getting a hold of any of those legally liable for receiving suits or other documents, as well as handling finances on behalf of the company, are present in letters from Johnson's attorneys, who also point out a, quote, concerning pattern of behavior, end quote, as, quote, several young artists entered into agreements with the company, surrendered their paintings or artworks, and received no payment. The company repeatedly promised future payment, which was never fulfilled, end quote. Another former employee claimed in conversation with Art News to be owed over £15,000 or just shy of $20,000, but spoke anonymously pending a legal action. The reportedly atypical payment terms did raise my eyebrows here, as they do seem to open the door to potentially predatory behavior. Pictorum would take works on about 20 to 30% consignment for the artist's share of the proceeds, as opposed to the typical 50-ish%. The works would go into an exhibition to be sold later, and the gallery would supposedly pay the balance after they sold, but obviously these artists have not received that remainder. The Pictorum Art Group was dissolved back in July, and Art News' attempts to reach the Navin brothers were unsuccessful. It remains unclear, therefore, whether these artists will ever be paid or get their artworks back. We also learned that a UK museum is raising $4.6 million to keep a medieval masterpiece from entering a private collection. The Dorset Museum and Art Gallery in Dorchester has launched a campaign to keep a rare Netherlandish altarpiece titled The Master of the Sherborne Almshouse Triptych from 1480 through 90, which is valued at £3.5 million rather than permit its owners to sell it at auction. The funds it is raising are intended to either buy the work for public display and or obtain an export ban on it. Last week also saw Greta Thunberg banned from Venice after she and several members of the Extinction Rebellion environmental group turned Venice's Grand Canal bright green by dropping non-toxic fluorescein dye from boats on Monday to protest what they view as the world's slow progress in transitioning away from fossil fuels. The group additionally performed a mock funeral procession while dressed in red with veiled faces, then unfurled a banner reading Stop Ecocide from Venice's Rialto Bridge to highlight, quote, the massive effects of climate collapse, end quote. Interestingly enough, this was only one of a series of demonstrations at lakes, fountains, and waterways across 10 Italian cities following the recent United Nations Climate Change Conference, or COP30, in Brazil, which the USA did not attend, and during which the EU threatened to veto a weakened agreement before ultimately signing a deal still criticized for lacking sufficient urgency on emissions cuts. The Swedish activist and 35 other protesters were therefore banned from the city of Venice for 48 hours and fined $178 apiece by Venetian officials as a result. In spite of Venice's heightened vulnerability to climate change, especially rising seas, Luca Zaia, the regional governor, told The Independent that the stunt was, quote, a disrespectful act towards our city, its history, and its fragility, end quote. Meanwhile, Hands Off the Arts members and other creatives, plus former staff, protested recent changes at the Kennedy Center, which they and others in the art world see as politicization of the historic institution by Trump and his administration on November 24th. Firings across the center, including the entire dance programming team, began after leadership changes early this year and have continued since. Artists and now former staff showed up to participate in a coordinated performance arts-based protests, primarily dancing, and expressed concerns that artistic freedoms are at risk in this country. Several interviewees of local WUSA 9, including local artists and former staff, said they think the center, quote, has lost its mission and sense of community, end quote, and that it was, quote, really painful to see such a beautiful jewel of the arts be taken apart for political reasons, end quote. They see what's happening at the center as a warning sign for other American institutions. Notably present there was the Kennedy Center United Arts Workers Union. But that's not the end of our story, honeys. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, the ranking Democrat on the U.S. Senate Committee on Environment and Public Works, which oversees public buildings, including the center, launched an investigation of the leadership at the Center for the Performing Arts last week over what he says are, quote, millions in lost revenue, luxury spending, and preferential treatment for Trump allies, end quote. Included in the senator's letter to the Kennedy Center president, Richard Grenell, are claims that some documents obtained by the committee appear to show that non-arts groups are getting significant discounts on rental fees at the Kennedy Center. One example of this, the Washington Post writes, is a copy of a contract with FIFA that shows the International Soccer Organization will not pay the usual $5 million in rental fees when it takes over for 3 weeks to announce next year's World Cup draw. To which Grenell responded that the International Soccer Organization has, quote, given us several $millions in addition to paying all of the expenses for this event. A simple rental fee would not have been enough to cover the magnitude of the event, end quote. Senator Whitehouse says, however, that these and other actions show a, quote, profound disregard, end quote, for leadership's, quote, fiduciary responsibility, end quote. The Why We Care here, it's another case of poor timing in some senses. NPR writes that these allegations of financial mismanagement come at a time of declining audiences. The Washington Post found that ticket sales at the Kennedy Center have, quote, taken a nosedive. On average, 43% of tickets have not been sold since early September, end quote. And that's, of course, on top of artist cancellations, layoffs, and resignations at the Kennedy Center. We did also have some good news last week in the form of an update on a major Institute of Museum and Library Sciences court case. A Rhode Island U.S. District Court granted a permanent injunction in Rhode Island versus Trump on November 21st, stating attempts to dismantle the institution were unlawful, unconstitutional, and in direct violation of Congress's clear statutory directives. The injunction essentially prevents the Trump administration from further carrying out the executive order relating to IMLS and vacates its actions, impacting all states, not just the 21 that are a part of this initial ruling. Attorney General of Rhode Island, Peter F. Noronha, stated, quote, in courts across the country and here in Rhode Island, we continue to find that we are right on the law and right on principle. With this order, these 4 agencies can continue to serve our communities, whether through your neighborhood library, labor dispute arbitration, or support for small businesses, end quote. The president of the American Library Association, a leader in these efforts in Congress and the courts to preserve the Institute of Museum and Library Services, also wrote that, quote, this victory belongs to all of us and we build the future of our libraries together. As we celebrate this decision, ALA invites everyone to keep using and speaking up for libraries. Your voice makes a difference and your community leaders need to hear it, end quote. It is unclear how this ruling will impact IMLS staffing or grants, as well as the hearing scheduled for oral arguments set for December 4th in the First Circuit Court of Appeal. The Trump administration is likely to appeal this ruling either way. And finally, honeys, we learned that Alma Allen will represent the U.S. Pavilion at the 2026 Venice Biennale. The selection of the Mexico-based American sculptor on November 24th ended an increasingly contentious and politically thorny search for a U.S. Pavilion artist. Ellen will fill the pavilion with a 30-work exhibition curated by Jeffrey Epstein titled Call Me the Breeze. Artforum writes that the artist's, quote, polished rounded surfaces and biomorphic shapes evoke the work of Constantine Brancusi, end quote. Ellen has been on the rise over the last decade, but would be, rather unusually, starring in Venice without having first had a major museum solo, unlike many past U.S. pavilion artists. Ellen was also not the first choice, apparently. The Washington Post reported that curator John Ravenel and artist Robert Lazzarini were initially awarded the commission, but the proposal was withdrawn after the collapse of a funding agreement between the State Department and the University of South Florida's Contemporary Art Museum. There are a few why we cares here, first being that some questions remain about the selection process and its details, as Allen told the New York Times that he had not submitted a formal proposal to the Biennale Commission, but was instead approached directly with the offer by Uslip, who the artist had reportedly never met before, though he said he accepted this offer right away. In years past, the U.S. Pavilion artist had been selected through a call for proposals reviewed by the Advisory Committee on International Exhibitions, which is assembled by the National Endowment for the Arts and the U.S. Department of State and State Department. One of our sources, HypeArt, noted that fewer candidates applied this year, a trend that some attribute to the State Department's guidelines requiring proposals to, quote, reflect and promote American values, end quote, and prohibiting programs tied to DEI, further narrowing the field. And the second reason, as Art News posited, is that, quote, in the context of the ideological reweaving of arts and culture under President Trump, the choice of U.S. representative offers a prism through which to read his priorities, end quote. We also learned GoFundMe created donation pages for hundreds of museums this fall, but did not tell the museums. Organizations across the USA were shocked to learn that the crowdfunding platform, better known for helping individuals with personal causes, had established nearly 1.6 million pages benefiting U.S. nonprofits without informing the institutions themselves or giving them the opportunity to opt out. That list includes the Cleveland Museum of Art, the Baltimore Museum of Art, the Dallas Museum of Art, the Philadelphia Museum of Art, the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, New York's Museum of Art and Design, the Museum of Contemporary Art, North Miami. You get the picture. There are three main problems with GoFundMe having done this. Their pages were optimized for web searches and built to draw donors potentially away from the nonprofit's own websites. GoFundMe also charges a transaction fee, thus lessening the amount of the donation to the museums, and a spokesperson for the platform stated GoFundMe could not determine how much money was donated to museums using these pages since the donated funds were not broken down by type of nonprofit. After a California ABC station was the first to break the news, GoFundMe published an apologetic blog post headlined, "Nonprofit Pages, We Listened and Made Changes," which reads in part, quote, "We understand clearly that our recent efforts with nonprofit pages have caused confusion, concern, and distraction from the vital missions of the very nonprofits we aim to support. We are very sorry for this and take responsibility for missing the mark," end quote. This is being seen as scandalous, and we care about it because it is still a huge, potentially, loss of donations to these organizations at maybe the worst time. Looking north momentarily for more good news, Canada has passed a resale royalties bill. The Art newspaper reports that Canada's minority Liberal government passed its November 17th budget and with it delivered a significant win for the country's visual artists, a commitment to introducing those resale rights. Basically, this means that the artists would receive a royalty when their work is resold through auction houses or galleries. A version of this commitment failed in 2022, but this one brings Canada closer to more than 90 countries, including France, the UK, Australia, that already mandate resale royalties typically at 5%. The push follows 2 decades of lobbying by the arts nonprofit CARFAC, the RAAV, the association representing visual artists in Quebec, and cultural leaders such as former Senator Patricia Bovey. Says Executive Director of CARFAC, April Britsky, the policy offers long overdue financial recognition from artists, many of whom earn very low incomes despite their major cultural contributions. Although this is an important win for all artists, it is especially so for Indigenous artists who have frequently been exploited in the secondary market. RAAV's Camille Kazin says the measure additionally acknowledges the value of the artist's work and will improve their living conditions. And Corey Dingle, who oversees the Norval Morisseau estate, adds that the resale royalties will help preserve artists' legacies, fund cultural education, and support institutions that rely on art for teaching and inspiration. And turning to music for a moment here, the AI country hit Walk My Walk, built on Blanco Brown's sound, has sparked questions of attribution as well as ethics. The Grammy-nominated country artist has worked with Britney Spears, Childish Gambino, and Rihanna, but was completely shocked by the #1 charting on Billboard's country digital song sales this month of a song attributed to him but which he himself had never even heard of. Credits for the gritty and chant-heavy track Walk My Walk list Abier Rivaldo Taylor as one of the song's creators, while Apple Music and Spotify identify him as both the songwriter and producer. Taylor is similarly behind Deaf Beats AI, one of several X-rated AI-generated country artists that exploded across social media last year and who has been connected to a collaborator of Brown's, Abraham Abushmais. Brown himself said, quote, "My phone just kept blowing up. Somebody said, inner quote, 'Man, somebody done typed your name in the AI and made a white version of you. They just used the Blanco, not the brown,' end all quotes." The artist stated that the digital avatar fronting Walk My Walk, a white AI-generated country singer built with a vocal approach modeled on Brown's sound, is where the moment shifted from eerie to uncomfortable for him. Quote, "It's a white AI man with a black voice, and he's singing like a Negro spiritual," end quote. Brown additionally pointed out that he has worked for decades to get to his current level of repute, but, quote, "An AI song built on his vocal identity and paired with a white avatar went straight to #1, a dynamic," he says, reflects a similar pattern in Nashville. Innovation from black artists being reattributed, end quote, writes AP News. It's worth noting the response from Brown has been multi-part. He is not necessarily anti-AI nor mad at Ebushmai or Taylor, but sees this as a reminder of how the industry assigns value regardless of actual talent. Brown has already studio recorded his own cover of the song, which his management says he wants to use as a part of his own lived experience, quote, "to force the industry and lawmakers to confront who owns art and what happens when technology outpaces the rights of the human creators it imitates," end quote. So the why we care here is that the success of Walk My Walk has made one thing clear to musicians and educators alike. AI-generated music has leapt from internet experiment to commercial disruptor. The director of the Ohio University Music Industry Summit, Josh Antonuccio, says, quote, "We are entering a very strange and unprecedented period of both creation and industry. AI has essentially democratized the act of music creation itself," end quote. Yet that democratization and its artistic products have come with no guardrails, so companies and musicians are all trying to get ahead of it. Some labels have even shifted from lawsuits to negotiation as a result. For example, Universal Music Group recently settled copyright infringement lawsuits with Udio and signed a new licensing agreement with the platform, while Warner Music Group partnered with Suno in what the companies called a first-of-its-kind agreement to develop licensed AI music that both compensates and protects artists on Tuesday. We also got word that Nina Simone's childhood home has now been fully restored. A group of contemporary artists led by Adam Pendleton purchased the three-room house that Eunice Wayman, one of 8, lived in from her birth in 1933 until 1937 in North Carolina. After doing so in 2017, they partnered with the African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund, a part of the National Trust for Historic Preservation, which designated the site a national treasure in 2018. Renovations began in June 2024, and although they are now complete, the house is not yet open to the public, as both the Action Fund and the artists are working with the Tryon community to, quote, "make the house a shared space open to eventual cultural heritage tourism," end quote, says Samuel Wayman, Simone's younger brother, in a statement from the National Trust for Historic Preservation, quote, "Preserving our home preserves the piano lessons, the joy, the discipline, and the discovery of her gifted talent all recorded in those walls. It's an honor to share this with the world as she would have wanted me to," end quote. Also last week, Bach compositions lost to history were performed for the first time in 300 years. Researchers had finally concluded that 2 pieces thought to be composed by the famous German in his youth, discovered in the 1990s, were indeed genuine. The newest additions to Bach's official catalog were identified by the director of the Bach Archive in Leipzig, Peter Wolny. Dutch conductor and organist Toon Koopman performed both for an audience gathered in St. Thomas Church in Leipzig, Germany, where Bach is buried, to listen to Chaconne in D minor, BWV 1178, and Chaconne in G minor, BWV 1179 on November 17th. We also heard that the Rijksmuseum will partner with researchers to explore the health benefits of art. The findings of an arts interaction study done between March 2021 and March 2022 led its researchers to posit that Parkinson's patients may benefit from personalized treatment plans that take creativity into account as both a therapeutic tool and a potential outcome. The findings of the second part of the study, published this past January, confirmed that 8 subjects who explored different creative practices such as painting, music making, and writing across a 10-week period overall reported less anxiety and an increased sense of well-being. Researchers also noted a slight improvement in cognitive function and fewer visits to healthcare providers. The Michael J. Fox Foundation announced on November 17th that it had awarded team member Bob Loam The director of the Center of Expertise for Parkinson and Movement Disorders at Netherlands Radboud University Medical Center its Pritzker Prize for his work on holistic Parkinson's care. According to the art newspaper, the $200,000 U.S. grant that the prize comes with will be used for the team's newest 18-month study, which will involve 3 groups of participants, one of which will explore the Rijksmuseum's art collections via a free annual pass and special evening visits. And after more than 40 years on the job, art critic Christopher Knight began his retirement on November 29th. Knight has been a renowned, incisive voice in the art world for nearly half a century and was one of the last full-time art critics left at a U.S. daily newspaper. He received a Pulitzer Prize for criticism back in 2020. And Los Angeles Times staff writer Jessica Gelt wrote of her colleague in a recent column, quote, "It's impossible to overstate the loss Knight's departure represents for the paper and Los Angeles, or what a tireless, generous, inspiring colleague he is. In short, he is everything a truly excellent critic should be," end quote. While art critics could be seen as gatekeepers to the art world and therefore figures embodying its elitism, art critics have a very long and important role in art history of helping us to determine when or how an artwork or an artist is speaking to something truly amazing, truly unique, truly important about whatever our context is. And in that sense, at least, Knight's retirement is definitely a loss for all of us. We also heard that everyone's favorite New York City mayor-elect has named his Arts and Culture Transition Committee. The 28 members selected by Mamdani include Mellon Foundation President Elizabeth Alexander, MoMA PS1 Chief Curator Ruba Katrib, Kimberly Drew, a curatorial director at the Global Mega Gallery Pace, Gonzalo Casals, a former commissioner of cultural affairs for New York City, and several New York Public Library staff members. Recall, honeys, that many in the art world, especially of New York, celebrated Mamdani's win, including New York Times contributor Siddhartha Mitter, artist Laurie Simmons, critic Jerry Saltz, and El Museo del Barrio. He seems strongly connected to this sector, and we like the strength and the breadth of the lineup he chose. And that, honeys, is our show. Thank you for tuning in this week. We will continue to have new stuff for you next one, and the next one, and the one after that. So until next time, take care and hydrate or dehydrate. We'll talk soon. Our intro and outro music was created by Chris Meinhold, but the production, fact-checking, hosting, recording, editing, all of that was done by yours truly, Celia Bugno. Be sure to like, comment, follow, subscribe, comment on Substack, Patreon, your favorite streaming platforms, and social media.